Chapter 10. The Manipulation of the Panamanian Elections. Kurt Muse. "Comandante," said one of my aides excitedly, bursting into my office one day in 1988. "Tenemos un gringo. We have a gringo, and he has all sorts of radio gear and documentation in English." The gringo was a young American employed by the U.S. government named Kurt Muse. His mission was to set up a clandestine radio and computer operation to subvert the May 7, 1989 Panamanian elections. The discovery of Muse in his secret installation was not only a coup for our intelligence services, but it was also a special opportunity to shed light on what the United States was really up to. For me, the U.S. covert action was tantamount to the Watergate break-in or the theft of the Pentagon Papers in the United States. Reagan and Bush had been caught red-handed violating our sovereignty. And more than anything else I could say about the incident, I have to admit one sober fact. Our mishandling of the capture of Kurt Muse was a fatal error for which I alone must take the blame. Immediately upon his capture, we should have cried foul before every international forum around the world, then postponed the elections because of U.S. meddling. Muse had come to Panama perhaps a month or two prior to his capture. Quickly, he began testing radio equipment. We began getting indications that our military communications were being tampered with. We set out to track the source, but realized that we did not have the skills and expertise to do the job. We sought advice, consulting with the Cubans, Israelis, and East Germans. We picked up the necessary equipment we needed and sent teams for quick training courses in those countries to learn the latest techniques in catching high-tech invaders. Our men came back after a few weeks with the equipment and skills to track down the culprits. Later, the Americans, in the midst of their embarrassment once the Muse affair was revealed, tried to divert attention from their illegal activity by planting the story that the Cubans were responsible for catching Muse, as if to say that the Panamanians didn't have the intelligence and know-how to do it. But this was not true. Panamanians did the job all by themselves, and we were very proud of our accomplishment. Homing in on radio signals was relatively easy, since Panama City is on flat terrain. The method was to send out monitoring equipment in several teams and to start circling the city, listening for wayward channels, always selecting the most likely time for the interference to take place. The surveillance team, despite its importance and prestige, was operating secretly for fear of being detected by the Americans. To avoid leaks, not even our own G2 intelligence officers knew about their operations. Before long, they scored a hit. The jamming signals had been found. Next, the monitors began running smaller and smaller concentric circles until they narrowed their target down to 3 high-rises in the Congrejo section of town. Painstakingly, they kept up the vigil until they reached one building, then one individual apartment. Inside was a very frightened man who said his name was Kurt Muse. He was caught cold-fisted and red-handed. We found paperwork with plans for the operation, antenna equipment, sophisticated gear that could easily be disguised inside a guitar case. Within minutes, the notification came to me. Muse was important. That became clear immediately. He was not a spy at all, really just a communication specialist sent with the necessary equipment. I never saw him in person, but I remember my impression from seeing him on television. Tall, slender, with a terrified look in his eye. He had no weapons, no protection. Several accomplices happened to be away when we seized the building, and they slipped out of the country. He had nothing and no one to fall back on, since officially the Americans wanted to pretend he didn't exist. But Muse could describe the entire operation, and we had plenty of evidence backing up what he had to say. Quite a find. We sent in an evaluation team to interrogate him, holding him for a while in isolation, discovering the details of the operation. Muse, realizing he had no lawyer, no contact at all with the outside world, needed no encouragement to open up. He was quite talkative. The operation, he said, was intended to intervene in the election, providing phony radio and TV programming before, during, and after to show that the opposition parties were winning no matter what the truth was. The idea was to provoke a swift, sympathetic reaction for the opposition at home and overseas, to report an opposition victory in the elections before ballots were collected. They wanted bogus reporting on all levels, creating the impression that everything had been decided in favor of the Americans and their candidates. The Americans must have known right away that we had Muse, but didn't say anything until we made the announcement. One thing was clear. The Americans needed to free Kurt Muse. He was charged with espionage against the nation, a very serious crime under Panamanian law, as it would be anywhere else in the world. The United States declined to say that he had military status, since that level of military espionage was tough to defend. It was easier to defend him under civil law, with his rights to a lawyer, to visitation, food, etc. First, they sent the consul to see him, treating him like any other American from the old Canal Zone, a sailor who had too much to drink and got into a bar fight or something. Next, they sent along people who sign in at the jail as Muse's relatives. But we knew that these were neither cousins nor brothers or sisters. These were government operatives sent in to check on him and give him one specific instruction: don't talk. And when they found out to their dismay that he already had talked, they switched to plan B. Say everything you confessed was a lie, that you were coerced. We monitored his jailhouse conversations with these so-called family members. Shut up, don't talk, they said. It's all a lie, you were pressured, they said. It was under duress. But there was no duress, no pressure. The technical details of what he was doing were right there in our hands. So was the documentation to make the gear work. Nobody could have defended themselves against this. We had the goods. Muse was such an embarrassment to the United States that his rescue from Modelo prison was the prime mission of none other than Delta Force itself more than a year later, the first operation planned in the 1989 U.S. invasion of Panama. He had been presented to reporters and confessed to what he had done. It was a blow to the United States, but they never acknowledged that he was a CIA agent or paid at all by the United States, as if he were an extraterrestrial that just appeared suddenly from nowhere. Colonel Marcos Justin was the one person to argue strenuously for us to cancel the elections. He said we should play it up big, protest, and put Muse up for a public trial. He said that this was the exact moment to say there could be no elections because the United States had conspired in our domestic politics, and we needed to investigate how far they had penetrated our system. Justine was right. Looking back, I see that this would have been the key moment to have shown the whole world how the United States was manipulating not only the electoral process, but all of Panama's internal affairs. I miscalculated in not denouncing the U.S. more strongly, along with all the evidence we had gathered. We could have appealed to the international community, then called off the elections and demanded international sanctions against what the United States was doing to us. And I decided against it. Why? Because I thought that the Panamanian people would understand this blatant interference in our lives and vote against the candidates that the United States supported. That was logical as far as it went, but I wasn't taking into account what else the Americans had in store for us. They provided money, organization, advisors, propaganda, and the strategy for the candidates that they endorsed. Guillermo Endara, the Civic Crusade candidate for president, and his running mates were so evidently puppets of the United States that a sense of disgust rose about them among the Panamanian masses. If the Americans were as certain as they said they were that the government candidate, Carlos Duque, could be easily defeated by Endara, they certainly didn't show it. The United States, under the secret Panama 4 operation, allocated at least $10 million for destabilizing Panama prior to the elections.